Well, for Tuesday, we've got something kind of fun and interesting. I think it's fun and interesting anyway. We're returning to hand spiking rails because we have a rather unique situation, and that's that I've been building this turntable for the railroad, and now I have to hand spike all of the different elements for the turntable, and that's some fairly unique challenges when it comes to hand spiking. So let's take a look at the spikes that I am using. These are Micro Engineering's large spikes to the left and medium spikes to the right, and I'm using both of those. Also, I'm going to be using Yagas Creek, that's Lagas Creek spikes. Those are the silver ones here. Reason being, Micro Engineering isn't making the large spikes anymore. I've been trying to get some, but I can't even find any on eBay. They may just be off the market permanently. They may be back, who knows. But the Yagas Creek are readily available. I ordered, I don't know, like 800 more of these from Mike over at Yagas Creek. You can see that the head on them is slightly smaller, and of course they're silver, so they're a little bit different, but they function really well, and they're going to work out just fine. I'm installing the spikes using Micro Mart's spiking pliers, the spike insertion plier, and you can see it's just a needle nose pliers with a little T carved into the end. Our friend Steve made his own. He just got some needle nose pliers and a cutoff wheel on his Dremel and made his own. And if you want one of these, you may have to do the same thing because these two are no longer on the market. Micro Mart may make another run of them, maybe not. I guess hand spiking rail is becoming less common, let's say. At any rate, you grab the head of the spike and you put the head in that little T shape there, and then you clamp down really tight with your hand because you don't want this thing twisting as you're putting it in. Otherwise, it'll bend the head over like this. But the goal is to clamp the spike into your pliers and then simply push it down into the tie this way. If the ties are made of a soft wood, mine are made of red cedar, and the spikes will readily go in. And then the ties are also glued to a soft material, in this case, a sound deadening board, because the spikes are going to go all the way through. And if you have something hard below, like plywood, well, they're going to go so far in and then stop. I'm also spiking my rails down on top of tie plates. So I've got these tie plates. I get the tie plates from Ozark Miniatures. But what I did, because I go through so many of these, is I made a mold for my casting machine, and I just cast up my own at this point because I go through thousands of these things, and that way I can just knock out a few hundred when I need them. But they really enhance the look, and you wouldn't use them in the smaller scales. We know a guy that did this with his O-scale railroad using tie plates, but typically you don't see people using a lot of tie plates. But it adds a small amount of challenge to the whole process. It also involves, in this large scale, spiking every single tie, where in the smaller scales, typically people will only spike every sixth tie or something like that, because you're not really going to notice. Now I'm putting this spike in at a slight angle, which is not really good practice. Try to push the spikes straight down in, otherwise you run the risk of bending them again. And then in my case, I have to make sure I straighten out my tie plate, make sure everything's nice and square as I'm going. I'm checking gauge with a Yagas Creek track gauge here. And one of the things about the Yagas Creek, not only can I use that to ensure that I'm getting my rails in gauge, but I can kind of slide it along the rails here because the pins hang down a certain amount on the gauge, and if I have any spike heads sticking up, it will snag on those, and I can spot that I've got a spike head that's a little up. It's a lot of work, but the results are worth it. I just love the look of this hand-spiked rail on top of the tie plates and the weathered ties and so on. Now this piece of track is actually the lead that goes over to the turntable, and that's the main subject for today, the challenges associated with something unique like a turntable. So the first unique problem are the ties. Most of our ties are rectangular. They're wider than they are tall. The ties on the turntable are perfectly square. So they have a different profile. Moreover, the ties that go on the turntable deck are really long. In this case, they're 8 inches long, which is substantially longer. And then there are a bunch of little 1-inch ties that are used on the ring rail. The ties that set on the bridge, the turntable bridge, are going to be a single unit that is removable from the bridge for servicing, and in this case for spiking the rails to the bridge. And then there are about 100 standard ties beyond the turntable going over to the actual roundhouse. So the two very unique challenges here are spiking the rail to the turntable bridge, and then below spiking a curved rail to the little 1-inch ties that form the ring rail. So let's start with the ring rail. The ring rail supports the bridge. It has wheels on the bridge at both ends that ride on the ring rail to support the weight of the locomotive. And so I needed about, I could get 110, as a matter of fact, of these short little 1-inch ties. And then before putting those into the turntable pit, they needed to be stained, since I didn't want to try staining them once they were in place. They glued directly to the footing that's in the turntable pit, which is made of birch plywood, very hard birch plywood. And so while the spikes will easily go into the red cedar ties, they're going to stop when they hit the plywood. So that's one problem. The ring rail itself has to be bent to an 18-inch radius. I'm using a Yagas Creek rail bender, unfortunately, again, no longer on the market. But that way I can shape my ring rail to the exact 18-inch radius before setting it in place and then spiking it, so that I'm not constantly fighting with it, wanting to, getting an even bend on it. Once I got it shaped to the exact size, it simply set in place. I'm not going to be using tie plates here. I'm just going to spike it directly to the ties without tie plates. Our friend Dwayne has made us several of these templates for doing curves, and he made us one for the turntable here, which is awesome. So I can set that in place, and it neatly holds the rail in place while I'm spiking it. Now, because of the plywood base and because the spikes go all the way through the ties and into the base, I have to pre-drill all of the holes using this little engraving tool here. Without the pre-drilling, the spikes would go in as far as the plywood and then stop. So I have to pre-drill just because of the plywood base. It's come up a couple of times on the railroad where I've had to pre-drill ties before I can push the spikes in. If you remember, another time was when we were working on the logging railroad, and I wanted to just use sticks from out in the backyard as ties. The trickiest part was finding sections of sticks that were straight enough, and then I cut them down from two different sides to try to make it look like, logs that were cut in the forest. Then using the benchtop belt sander, I sanded one side of them flat, which will glue to the roadbed. The roadbed is a very thin plywood glued directly to extruded styrene foam. And then once the glue had set, I came back with my regular belt sander and flattened off the tops in order to set the rail in place. I interspersed a few regular red cedar ties, as you would find on a railroad, but that gave me a guide to know when I was at the correct height. Now I was ready to start spiking my rails to my logs, my ties. But here again, the sticks out in the backyard are a pretty hard wood, and there's no pushing ties into them without first pre-drilling holes for the spikes to go into. Also, just like with the ring rail, the plywood would need to be drilled. Here again, the results are well worth all of the effort in doing all of this. I just love the look on the logging railroad. I didn't use any tie plates on the logging railroad. I don't think you'd find tie plates on a logging railroad. I want it to look as rustic and cobbled together as humanly possible. As usual, I digress. Let's get back to the ring rail. So I started by spiking every 10th short tie or so, and because the holes were pre-drilled, it was real easy to push the spikes down in there. I wanted to make sure the ring rail was all held tightly in place, and then I could take away my template. In a few places, my pre-drilling had not gone down into the plywood, and that was real easy to spot when I'd try to push the spikes in, and they'd go in so far and then just stop. Once I got every 10th tie spiked, then I came back and started doing every single tie, and in fact, I'm still working on that. Okay, our next challenge is the bridge for the turntable itself. The deck here sits on top of the main girders and is removable. It's held in place by 3 screws, but that way I can take the entire deck off of the turntable bridge and work on it at the bench. And I'm going to leave it that way just for servicing in case I ever have to take this thing apart for servicing. I'm using the Micro Engineering medium spikes. The heads are somewhat smaller. This because I'm going to come back and deck over the entire structure here, and I don't want my wood decking to hit my spike heads. One of the unique challenges in building a turntable deck is that the rails that go on here have to be exactly the right length, and they have to be exactly centered on the turntable bridge. And I can check that by spinning my turntable bridge around and making sure that the spacing is exactly the same at both ends of the bridge. So I started by spiking these rails in place with just a few spikes so that I could still move the rails around if need be, and then putting the deck back onto the turntable and rotating it to make sure that the spacing was correct and that my rails were perfectly centered on the bridge, and then I could come back and spike every tie. And actually I didn't spike every tie. I spiked about every 4th tie, simply because again it's all going to be covered up by wood decking. It's not going to show, so I just need to make sure that it's secure without worrying too much about the appearance. Occasionally I'd run into a tie that was really hard and difficult to put these smaller spikes into. In that case, I just switch over to a softer tie. Again, I don't have to spike every single tie here. I just need to make sure that everything is secure. So I've only spiked about every, 5th or 6th tie, something like that. And then I've come back with red cedar slats, which are going to deck over the entire deck for the bridge here. And because I've used the smaller spike, I can get my wood right up next to the rail where need be. Of course, I need to leave a flangeway on the inside, but on the outside, I'm putting my planks right up against the rail. The bridge needs to be decked over this way because the train crews, the people working here in the locomotive shops, are walking back and forth across this bridge all the time. And so it needs to have both decking and railings for the locomotive crews. Anyway, just another look at hand spiking rail, and in this case, some of the very unique challenges that come up when you're spiking your own track this way. And some of the wonderful creative solutions and fun things that you can do. Next Sunday, Karen and I are back at the St. George Color Country Open House looking at another garden railroad, and I hope you're going to want to see that. So if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please subscribe by clicking on the upcoming blue button. Zoink! Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you here on Sunday. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.